Genesis chapter 11 is one of those chapters that once you get there and you begin to look at it, you say to yourself, I never really realized how much is really here. So I'm hoping today that we can delve into some things that maybe you have forgotten or hadn't thought about in a long time, and perhaps maybe even recognize something for the first time. According to this chapter, Genesis chapter 11, the multiplicity of languages was God's response to one of mankind's most spectacularly wicked displays. It occurs early in recorded human history on the plains of Shinar, or modern-day Iraq. It was the building of the Tower of Babel. Now, on the surface, what they did doesn't look so horrifically evil. They just constructed a tower. But this building of a tower is going to give you a glimpse into the root causes of sin, what makes sin sinful. Have you ever wondered where sin comes from in your heart? Or why it has such power over you? Why you just cannot stop sinning even though you want to? Well, this is what this story is going to show you. If you've ever felt like life was disappointing in any way, your marriage, your job, your retirement, I think you'll find an explanation in this story. See, what God was doing here in the Tower of Babel, He is doing in your life. So let's look at the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 11. Now, the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Now, a couple of things to notice here. First, their attempt to stay together was an act of disobedience. God had already commanded him 3 times in Genesis to be fruitful and to multiply all over the earth for His glory. But they did not want to obey. They wanted to stay in one place. Now, here's a little throwaway lesson for you. God always pushes His people outward to multiply towards sending and giving. Sinful man always looks inward toward building for his security and His glory. Secondly, and more importantly, what do the people in Genesis chapter 11 want? 3 things specifically. A city, a tower that reached to the heavens, and a great name. Now, why those 3 things, you ask? Well, it's rather quite obvious, isn't it? A city represents a home, a place to belong. A tower represents how they wanted to do something significant in life, for their lives to matter, for permanence. And finally, to make a name for themselves. They wanted greatness. Now, ironically, God had already given them all of those things in the garden. They had a city. God was their home. In fellowship with Him is where they got their sense of belonging. They had a tower. They got their significance by doing God's will, from being sons and daughters and vice regents of our King. A name, they had a name. The greatness that they sought was supposed to be in the Almighty. But now they have rejected God. And so, like we went over a few weeks ago, they feel naked, stripped totally bare. And here's what this chapter teaches you. Sin, in essence, is an attempt to find in something or in someone else what you lost in God. See, this is why it says they reached up toward the heavens. They're trying to get something back that they once had in God. And the language is specific, and it's there on purpose. They call this tower Babel. which literally means the gate of God. They were building a tower to go through a gate to get up to God because they needed these three things. So here's the first point. Sin tries to construct towers to heaven. Their desires were for longing, security, and greatness. And none of those things is wrong. It's where they were looking for them that is wrong. And people haven't changed. We still desire the exact same things. We want a city, a place to feel really safe, a group to belong to. Isn't that why family is so important? Or to be accepted into the right groups at school, or having the right people praise you. We want to belong to a city, something that guarantees our safety. That's why insurance is a $1 trillion industry in our country. We want our lives to matter. We want some sort of guarantee that it can happen. That's why some people stress over their careers or the lack thereof. We yearn to be connected to greatness. Belonging to something important matters. Security, significance, and greatness. None of those things is wrong. It's where we look for them that's wrong. And listen, one of the greatest discoveries of my life was realizing that I had been reaching out for God even when I didn't know it. There was this yearning that I experienced even as a kid. I didn't know how to articulate it, but I yearned for something. Sometimes I feel it when I'm here worshiping. It's this deep yearning for something beyond what I can experience on my own. Do you want to be spiritual? I mean, do you really want to live on the basis of the unseen, to be different, to walk the path of Jesus? Well, being spiritual begins with change. And change only happens when you surrender to God. And change can only occur if you realize that every tower that you build in your life is an attempt to regain something that God had designed to give you in Himself. So first, sin tries to construct towers to heaven. So let's keep moving. Verse 5. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the people were building. Now, that's a play on words. They're trying to build up, and God says, let us go down there and see what they're up to. It's very condescending language. And you'll note a little bit about the character of God as He does this. You see, not cynicism, but almost a sense of playfulness, of trying to get us to see the personality and the love of God, even when we try to only see ourselves. Verse 6. The Lord said, if this one people speak in the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. In other words, every form of evil will spring from this declaration of their own awesomeness. So here's your second point. Sin's beginning is by my will, in my strength, for my glory. Again, what are they looking for? Security, significance, and greatness. And let me say it again. These things are not wrong. They were just supposed to possess them by depending on God. Now, they want to do it themselves in their own way, by their own strength, so that they can get the glory. And remember their goal stated in verse 4. Let us build a city for ourselves, a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we can make a name for ourselves. One of the things that this chapter teaches you is that out of that impulse grows every kind of corruption and wickedness known to man. And we can understand the word sin just by looking at the middle letter, I. What I want instead of what God wants. And my strength instead of God's. So that I can get the glory and attention and not Him. Sin's wickedness does not begin with the immorality of the act, but with a heart that stands behind it. And this is why God says that this tower will become the source of immeasurable amounts of sin. Now let's go back to that word, Babel. Why is it called the Tower of Babel? Babel, or Babylon, as it's translated elsewhere, is going to become the symbol for mankind's oppression against God, the epitome of wickedness. Babylon is the name of the capital city of Israel's fiercest enemy all throughout the Old Testament. The kingdom that destroys Israel and takes Israel captive. In the book of Revelation, Babylon is the symbol of man's united front against God at the last battle. In chapter 18, verses 2 and 3, we find the connection all the way back to Genesis chapter 11. Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, for all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. In other words, every kind of sin and demonic influence is there. But that is one of the things that you really need to know. Babylon represents the full fruition of sins, but it begins all the way back in Genesis chapter 11 with a heart that says simply, I will, not God's will. And it's called pride, and it is at the root of all human sin. When Isaiah described the fall of Satan, he said, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Now, what makes Satan Satan? Well, what made Satan Satan is because he said, I will instead of God's will. The pride of I will is the root of all sin. So we get right here in this chapter and we ask the question as a reader, what is in my heart? To really get at what's going on in your heart, don't ask how moral you are. Ask by asking, are you living by your will or God's will? And by whose strength do you attempt to make it through each day? Yours or His? And whose glory are you concerned about? God's or yours? Let's keep going. Verse 7. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. Now, this is an incredible, well, they all are, miracle. Overnight, just like that, God creates languages. He invents all of these incredible languages out of nothing. They're up and running, and people are communicating just as they had done before. But it's not just that. Imagine what the next day was like. All of a sudden, some people that you can understand, you no longer can. And all the terrain begins to change. You think they saw God differently then? Because you can't explain that naturally. That's impossible. Verse 8. So the Lord scattered them there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. Here's the third point. Sin leaves crumbling towers of disillusionment in your life. It's interesting to me that God doesn't tear down the tower. He leaves it there standing as a message. He could have let them go on, but He didn't. Instead, he frustrated their attempts and tried to wake them up. So is God showing them judgment or mercy? Actually, both. Any judgment before the ultimate judgment is mercy. So let me ask, where are the broken towers in your life? Where have you tasted disappointment? Broken relationships, a drug addiction, humiliation? Did you get caught cheating in school and get kicked out? What if you learn to think about the disappointments in your life, the broken towers, as monuments with a message? And that message was, return to God. When you face the inevitable disappointment from a broken tower, which is an idol, you have one of four reactions. First, which is very common, you blame the idol itself. Meaning that we assume that we chose the wrong thing and we resolve to make a better choice next time, which is the pinnacle of idolatry, isn't it? Second, we blame ourselves. We say, I'm the problem. I didn't work hard enough. I'll do better next time. Or third, we blame the world. So you just give up on being happy. You become a cynical old person who mocks all of those young, naive people. Or you just get numb and you medicate through everything like drugs and alcohol and shopping or some hobby. Or you get angry and depressed and you just quit life altogether. But what we learn in this chapter is that there's a better choice. And that better choice is that you realize that you were created for another world. You want to be safe. You want to belong. You want to have a great name. You want to have beauty and significance, to be connected to greatness. But all these things you can find in God. Let me ask you a very serious question. Do you know how often God thinks about you? Oh my goodness. God saw you in the womb. He chose every one of your days. Not one hair falls from your head without the Almighty knowing it. When you preferred heaven over hell, He wouldn't leave you there. He came and took hell into Himself so that He could get you out. When you showed no interest in Him, when you outright rejected Him and told Him to leave you alone, He kept thinking of you anyway. Jesus put it on display when He said, Father, forgive him. He has no idea what he's doing. And He willingly endured your shame and the pain of your punishment to buy you back. You want to be known, valued, and approved of? You are. And it's richer and deeper and lasts longer than the love of any man. God just cannot stop thinking about you. So let me ask you another question. Are you trying to be special to someone? You are to Him. Are you trying to matter? You do to Him. Which leads us to the last verse in this section. This is verse 9. And it starts with these words. That is why, if you underline or mark something in the margin of your Bible, you should mark this. That is why it was called Babel. Because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. This is another play on words. The word Babel in Hebrew really sounds similar to balal, which means to confuse. By readjusting just the accents, you can change the word to mean confusion. And then, as soon as this story is over, the next chapter begins with the promise God makes to Abraham. That's why this is the final point. Fourth, God is constructing a better tower. See, Genesis chapter 11 is, in a sense, the fulcrum of the whole Bible. Man's attempt to build a tower back to God to regain what he lost in God. And yet here, God shows him that man's attempts will always fail. So in Genesis chapter 12, God starts to build his own tower. But he starts in a really odd place. He chooses a sterile, frail old man to begin building it. And here's the point. This is not a demonstration of human strength. It's just the opposite. It is the epitome of human weakness. And he says to Abram, I will give you a home, Abram. It will be better and more permanent than any home a man can build. I will give you significance, Abram. Greater than any tower, you will have a role in blessing the world. I will make your name great, Abram. Isn't that what he says? I will tie the greatness of your name to mine. And one day, Abram, all these scattered families on the earth with their new languages will be reunited in what I do through you. And so we fast forward through the whole Bible to the very last book, Revelation chapter 7 and verse 9. After this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. The text, the Bible is screaming at you, and it's saying, there they are. The very scattered nations of the earth, there they are. But this time, they're not all speaking one language, gathered around a tower, proclaiming the glories of their own strength. Instead, they are speaking multiple language, gathered around a tower that the Almighty built. And we get a glimpse of this in the middle of the Bible, in Acts chapter 2. When the Holy Spirit is first poured out, the first sign is that they speak what? Multiple languages. And this serves as a big, flashing signpost. And here is what it says. God's promise to reverse Babel is beginning to be fulfilled. What man was unable to accomplish in his strength, God accomplishes in his spirit. In other words, salvation is, from start to finish, the work of God. One of two towers is being constructed in your life. Yours, as a monument to yourself, which is a tower of inevitable disappointment. Or God is constructing a tower through you of eternal significance. It is a strong tower of refuge that you can run to and be saved. But you know, you can only be working one of the two. So what Genesis chapter 11 does is it's situated right here as its fulcrum. It asks the question, which tower are you building? Because as we'll look at it, Lord willing, next week in the life of Abram and then Abraham, and this great covenant that God makes with him, from now on, God is building this, leading us all the way to a place called Golgotha or Calvary, where ultimately all of God's plan will come to fruition. But if you don't understand Genesis chapter 11 and the power that it sets up for that which is coming in Genesis chapter 12, and then in verse 16 as we move on, you miss out. You miss the depth and the breadth and the length of what God is doing in the world for a bunch of sinners that don't deserve it, which demonstrates the absolute incredible amount of love that He has for each one of us. Never forget how God thinks of you and is concerned for you. Because if you do, you miss out on having a relationship with God. If you have not lived this way, but you want to, let us help you. You may have been a Christian 10 years, perhaps 20, and things are just now beginning to click. That's okay. It still happens for me. Let us help you. If you'd like prayers, our shepherds will be down here with me and some in the back. Or if you'd like to come to Jesus today, we will help you. We will help you be saved. If you need to, will you please come right now as we all stand and sing.